The City of St. Charles includes 6 unique historic districts. Historic districts create an attractive environment for residents to live and work, as well as draw tourists to help stimulate economic growth in the city. The preservation of a historic district is a daunting task. Preservation requires regulation and cooperation with builders, residents, and businesses to maintain the historic integrity of buildings, monuments, features, and surroundings. We are going to take an in-depth look at the dedication required to create and maintain a historic district.
This is 1966 at Boone Slick in South Main. This is the western house off to the left, and what the Boone Slick corridor looked like at this time. Off to the left is Wayside Market. This was where it was like a quick shop down here in South Main. It's where I got my milk and bologna to do sandwiches and so forth to do restoration. Part of the floor was dirt, mostly from rotten wood. This is what it looked like after Wayside Market moved out. This was the Western House. The Western House was considered an early hotel during the California Gold Rush, when early travelers traveled through here and they used the accommodations. This was still standing and in very poor condition. This was one of the buildings that Urban Renewal decided was too far gone and would use as a pilot project to help stimulate development within the South Main Historic District. Still had its original gallery and porch. You can see a gas light there was just recently put in the late 60s. But we knew it had history. From the archives, the Historical Society archives and other sources, we had photos and pictures of what the Western House looked like. So this was an accurate restoration done as a pilot project, exterior only, and then it was resold, and the interior was done by the present owners. This is what it looked like after restoration in 1978. You can see the greenhouse that is now to the left. The conservatory has not been built. This is what it pretty much looks like today. On the other corner, across from the Western House, that would be on the northwest side, was a trailer court in this particular building. I woke up one morning in the late 60s. I had looked at it and observed it was vacant. And I woke up one morning and it was torn down. And I felt it was a early salt box type of building. I was inside. It had post and beam and brick knocking type of construction. I thought we were in an historic district, but yet it was torn down. It was this building that prompted myself and others to form the South Main Preservation Society, which I was one of the founding members. The other faction of the Preservation Society was interested in improving the festival. Today, here's what sits on that site where that historic building was that could have been part of our historic district, but is no more. But if you look down there, you can see the curb cut. The curb cut going into nowhere. It actually tells the story of the curb cut that went into that building. And this is what the corner looks like where the trailer court once sat. On the other corner, which would be the southeast corner, was this building. Back behind it there was the Boone Center Workshop before it was torn down. And in the 70s, this is what it looked like. Urban Renewal did want to, said it was structurally unsound and wanted to tear it down. It also had some drug problems in this building, and it was the Preservation Society that appealed that this building was an important building architecturally that should be part of the corner of Boone Slick and South Main. So today it's a beautiful bed and breakfast inn restored, contributing architecturally and an asset to the South Main Historic District. On the other corner of Boone Slick and South Main was this building called Metal Processing. Metal Processing is located on the northeast corner of Boone Slick and South Main. Very nondescript type of building. Urban Renewal came in the late 60s with plans, and took him several years to do the planning and 5 years to implement much of the plans. But one of their plans was that this building had to be torn down, that we had a new Riverside Drive coming through. It was in the way. It was also had fire hazard. It had the upper floors of the old, this was the location of the old mill. The upper floors had been burned, and it was not really feasible to be restored. And on top of that, it couldn't be restored because it was in the middle of a floodway. And we said, where else would a mill be built except in the middle of a floodway? This is the mill site, the mill location again. By now we had taken off part of the mill. We had determined which was original, which was not original, and left the existing standing and boarded up for about 6 years. In the meantime, the society was able to convince Urban Renewal, instead of covering the historic Blanchette Creek, putting the mill into a parking lot, that we should actually enhance the Blanchette Creek and do wooden bridges and actually bring forth the early appearance of the bridge the bridge that was once there. This would help stimulate, we felt, the redevelopment of the mill, which was at the time considered too costly. You can see the sides of the buildings were caving in. It was on its last leg. One of the original windows, the 10/10, was still intact. One of the iron braces was still intact. The city had condemned the building a couple of times. We appealed and said, we have a plan down here. It's called historic preservation. And we knew what the building once looked like. We had photographs from the archives. And of course, this was Blanchette's, the community's founder, where he built at the first grist mill west of the Missouri River. And then later, it was a series of mills, including the woolen mill. It also was a prison a Union prison during the Civil War. But we knew the grain was ground from here for the early pioneers that headed west, because St. Charles was considered the trailhead, and had the unique architecture of a mill, the heights of the doors and how they used gravity to grind grain and back up their wagons to the doors to unload their bags of flour and wool or whatever. This is a picture of the mill in 1921. To the right there, the lower addition, you can see that's the addition that we allowed to be torn off and boarded up, where the original mill has been boarded up. And these were from photographs and foundations and footings that we were able to get in and determine where the original mill was. So when I became chairman in 1980 of the Special Business District, was able to the Special Business District had control over the remarketing of the mill site. And so we remarketed this site, which at one time was told to be impossible. And 6 years later, after boarding it up, we had 6 proposals, one of which was won, and $1 million restoration had taken place. So we saved the mill, we saved the mill site, the unique architecture for the community that says that we have a small town here complete with different styles and types of architecture. That's a depot, a firehouse, and a mill, which all have, and a blacksmith shop. They all have the unique types of architecture. After the flood of '93, the building was sold again, and another small addition was added to the back, although we were able to maintain and keep the original front part of the mill undisturbed, and another $2 million was put into this development. Once was to be a parking lot, this site is now considered to bring in more sales tax and tourism tax than about any other business in the historic district. Along next to the mill is the historic Blanchette Creek. Blanchette's home site was to the right of this. It's in the records of 5 log cabins where he built and began and established St. Charles in 1769. Here's the part of the creek that we were able to keep open and not have put into under culvert, and helped influence the identity of this historic creek, that the mill needed the creek, they needed the parameters of that this actually had water coming through here at times that would turn a double water wheel. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we were able to come up with some additional funds to do the beautification and stabilization of Blanchette Creek. Also, we were turning the corner here, coming up the Boone Slick Corridor, which we had envisioned of becoming also an improvement and an entryway into our community as this creek meanders along the Boone Slick Corridor. Photo of the bridge and bridge enhancements that identify the creek and what it looks like today, complete with water fountains, restored brick sidewalks, wood railings across the bridge. This is considered the home site of Louis Blanchette, one of the historical markers that the Historical Society had put up, and the Daughters of the American Revolution, I believe, has put up a plaque there as well. So historical plaques helped identify, even before I arrived, of the several buildings that there was something going on here. So the first thing in an historic district is to do historic plaques. Sidewalks, there was a mix match between brick and concrete. Some were even paths, 1966 there. And urban renewal had about $8 million to spend, and they were able to spend some of the funds down here in the sidewalk enhancement. And so this is a photograph of new sidewalks being put in place of concrete, and you can also see the electric lines that are on South Main. In 1969, this was part of the comprehensive plan to have the electric lines removed. It took 24 years to get the electric lines removed on South Main. Gas lights were an important feature. They're patterned after the original gas lights of the community. We're probably one of the few communities in the country that still have gas lights still operating, but they do add to the ambiance of the historic district. Brick sidewalks have been restored. Another section of some of the original brick sidewalk. This is 912 South Main on the other side of the mill. This is a building I personally restored in 1978. Had chicken coops in the back. Livestock was once there but after I'd purchased it, this was a challenge. Nothing had been happening down at this end of the block. It still had its original outside privy. It is still there today. The back of 912 looked like this. After restoration, it looked like this. I did the first improved sidewalk plan down in the historic district. There you can see the mill is off to the left. And I planted the first tree pits on South Main in years. And this is what the building looked like in 1978 after restoration, including the restoration of the shutters. And this is what the area where the chicken coops and all were at after restoration in the late 70s. And what it looks like today, including the red buds that I planted from up the street that are now 25 years old. And this is the building today. We're now moving up in 1966 photos here up into the 800 block. This is what the 800 block looked like on the northeast side. It was called the Old City Garage. Urban Renewal assisted in us relocating the city garage. There you can see the original marker of Lewis and Clark and of the Boone Slick Trail was moved, but this is where it's once sat. These are some of the rock piles of the city garage, the river in the background. Urban Renewal helped relocate the city garage off of Main Street, took the buildings down, and then this lot was available to be remarketed. And today, new development in what would be considered, we considered some of these properties non-compatible, and this is new construction. They've been so successful down here on South Main that there's a new addition just being completed that is actually gorgeous, so if you get a chance to drive by and see it on Riverside Drive, in addition to this building. So the Historic District has had guidelines. We were in Missouri's first historic district. It is the largest, and it had very strict guidelines that anything that was done had to comply or conform to the architectural standards. This is what has helped over the last 30 years develop the historic district into the quality that you see today. I lived across the street from this building in the center of these two nice Victorian buildings, and I was often intrigued by it. I talked to the owner about possibly purchasing it from time to time and was finally able to acquire it. It's considered one of the oldest buildings in St. Charles and in the historic district. It's an early French duplex. It's got the steep roof that indicates buildings of an earlier time and got the distinct French architecture. Within the building is wood pegged and numbered. Wide planks, 22, 24 inches wide, that were pits on. Fish-eyed type hinges were also found within the building. I restored this also in the late 70s. People would often ask, when did this building get moved in? And it's actually an original building from what some consider the late 17 or early 1800s. The lap siding on the front of the building is solid walnut. It's a very unique structure, very much like many you would find in St. Genevieve. Very similar to the Bulldog Miller home there. The stone that's in the front was salvaged from my restoration next to the mill from the Blanchette Creek, and this was incorporated into the building from the local site. In the 700 block, this was called Custom House, is what it looked like. When I moved out here, Hub Gleason had owned it, who was really interested in antiques. He also owned the Shimmer Blacksmith Shop. He did the restoration of the building. Now, the Custom House was considered where the early pioneers came through and registered before they headed west, and they kept track of the pioneers as they crossed over back by Pikers Club by ferry. This is the Newell McElhenney House back in 1966. The Historical Society did restore this in the 70s, much with federal grants and assistance. And off to the right, back in there, they had discovered Collier Cottage, which was restored. And this is what the Newell McElhenney House looks today. Back behind the Dingler's Tobacco Shop was this building, and it was a series of warehouses, carriage houses, that was considered to be torn down. Myself and the Preservation Society did petition that we not do parking lots all like you find up a few blocks up further where it's double parking, that we save some of our unique architecture from our past, and it was taking all of our backyards, and myself and a neighbor, we had young children at the time, and it was taking all of our yards. So we were able to get a single row of parking, did a compromise, and saved half of this carriage building, and it was restored and remarketed, whereas today it's the Lewis and Clark Center. Back in 1966, I call this the Weston property. It's where the Flower Peddler now is, and this is the same block as it looks today, free of the electric lines. This is Tompkins in South Main. If you look down between here, the mother-in-law house is on the right. This is 1966. You see a little red sign. Well, that's where the old Katy Depot used to sit. The Katy Depot sat in the middle of where Riverside Drive now is. This is a photograph of the Katy Depot in 1893 when it was constructed. And this is the Katy Depot as it looked in 1920 with the brick around the depot. These brick were salvaged and used in front of Kister Park. This is what the depot looked like in 1975. It was slated for demolition in May 1975 to make way for the access road. This was the Preservation Society's first very active role in trying to save one of our historic landmarks. We had to find a way, we had to find a solution. The Wabash Railroad depot had just been torn down, and this was the last remaining depot that would give any recognition that this town had a railroad and the importance that it played in our community. The South Main Preservation Society formed a petition drive and active campaign to save the historic depot, and we were successful in doing the persuasion and finding funds to assist in the relocation of the depot. During the meantime, the City Council, a proposal was made to the City Council that we should save the Pruk station, move it here, let the St. Charles station be removed. And one of your former presidents of the Historical Society said that the Pruk station belongs to Pruk, the St. Charles station belongs to St. Charles, and we went on successfully to save this depot, to relocate it, and to move it to a safe location. Here it is being dismantled. Here it is being moved by St. Charles Moving and Storage, who helped us find a solution to the way to move it to the other side of the tracks, a few hundred feet away, in the center of Frontier Park. The two footings were formed, and the depot was moved into these footings, and restoration had begun. Original doors were restored. Original paint colors were researched. The depot was brought back to its original paint colors. New windows, and the rooster crown from the early photographs that was missing was able to be replaced. We actually saved the old semaphore as well. This was the last operating hand semaphore on the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas railroad line at its time. The depot restored was used as a tourism and visitor center for a number of years until they located up on Main Street. Now it's pretty much used for special events. The Katy, Missouri, Kansas, and Texas caboose was saved. It was going to be sold to Moscow Mills for $1,000, and the Preservation Society stepped in and said and found a way to save it by applying some of the funds that from the sale of the track went into the restoration of these cabooses. We were hopeful for a tourist train at one time. We had about 6 miles saved, but we were finally only able to save the section of track that runs down through here, the last section of original Katy track and the entire state, and it runs down to the casino. We hope someday we might have some sort of trolley still work off of it, so we're always dreaming. Back up on the street, 1966, the first brick house, and what it looks like today. This is the 1966 where the Crow's Nest is located at, and next to it is a building that is called Southside Motors, I believe. But here's the Crow's Nest. I just got a slide this week. It's been repainted. This was our used car lot on South Main. It was Southside Motors. This particular place became a bar in the '70s, in the mid '70s. It was called Bonaparte's Retreat. But today, where the used car lot is a beautiful garden. Back to 1966, you can see off to the left, we actually had a billboard down here on South Main. This is the old Salvation Army building that was down here, right to the right of it. Glass blocks in the front of it, drop boxes, and this is what it looks like today. I assisted the lady on restoration of that, did research on what the porch should look like, and it was brought back to original early photographs. Golden Buffet. I remember the Golden Buffet. Alfred would come down and have a 15-cent glass of beer during the day. It was a daytime bar. It usually opened at dawn and closed at dusk, and it was an interesting bar, to say the least, and there was 2 of them down here at the time. And as you look down the street, this is what was illuminated, the old Miller sign. And today it's the Winery of the Little Hills. This building has been re-restored after a fire that fortunately did not damage too much of the exterior of the building. Back to 1966, next to the Golden Buffet was this garden area, this actually cooked barbecue, and what it looks like today. Back in 1966, next to the Winery of the Little Hills, catty corner from the mother-in-law house, was this nondescript building that was in our comprehensive plan as being non-compatible. It had a large picture window, and Paradise Candies operated out of it for a number of years, and they came to me and asked me what could we do to make this building fit in, be better, be part of the community. Well, I'd fallen in love with the old firehouse from photographs and so forth, and I knew that it had been, it had burned down, and it was back behind the Historical Society's present building, and I really admired its unique architecture and so forth. So I marked it off, and I knew there was another existing firehouse building up in Frenchtown. I was able to get in there, and I took measurements, and sure enough, with a veneer around the present existing building, this firehouse could be a replica of our early and lost firehouse and relocated in a piece of non-compatible architecture that that would fit into a small community. This was controversial at the time. People said, "You're trying to turn the historic district into a Disney World," and I said, Disney World has foreshortened stories and they cutesy things up. This is an exact replica of one of our lost landmarks and a lost architecture with its unique coin design along the side of it. And so in the early 90s, a $125,000 12-foot addition was added and sandwiched around the early old upholstery shop building. Moving on up the street, getting close to Stone Row, was a little barber shop and some more used cars. And this is the replacement replica building that we have in non-compatible space. Across the street was another non-compatible building. On the right there is Patches. Urban Renewal assisted us in acquiring the building, and it was removed and remarketed. And this is the replica building that you find there today. I'd fought very hard to keep the replica approach in the South Main Historic District, not to have new buildings that look new and fit in. I felt very strongly that they should be compatible with historic buildings. This was very much against the common belief of the architectural schools of the day. The California House, as it looked in 1966, was condemned and was going to be bulldozed down in 30 days. The Preservation Society petitioned that it be left alone and be boarded up, and that someone eventually would restore it. We had complaints about eyesores and how bad it looked, and the building is caving in, and I said, we have a plan down here, it's called historic preservation, leave it alone. So for another about 5 to 7 years, this building was also boarded up until the property owners came down in its price, and the area had grown where it could be afforded to be restored. This also was an early hotel during the heyday of St. Charles, when St. Charles was a boom town during much of the wagon trains heading west, and this is where they stayed. It was known for its oyster bar, the California House. Double balcony, very French looking. Across the street from the California House is Stone Row as it looked in '66. Built by slaves, on the National Register. This is Pop's General Store as it looked before he restored it, what it looks like today. One of the most picturesque scenes of the historic district, and was the setting for Back to Hannibal. I was told by the movie producers that we looked more like an early Hannibal than Hannibal. And this was the only block that electric lines were taken down. Yeah, they did shoot the movie here. They put sawdust on the street and covered the brick to make it more like a wooden, like a dirt street. Back behind the Stone Row buildings in 1966, this is what the back porches look like. And today, with a Landmarks Preservation Board that governs over how things look, how buildings look, how architecture looks, you have a rhythmic view of porch after porch lining up, looking fantastic as they look out over the river view. You don't have a modge-podge of different types of porches and designs that wouldn't even look compatible. So it's a beautiful view if you go along and see the back sides now as the front sides along Riverside Drive. Now this is the first state capitol as it looked in 1966. The first state capitol was restored in 1969. We call it our historic anchor. It had amazing and tremendous impact in the development of the historic district. It helped stimulate much of the development. It also said something seriously is going on here in the South Main Historic District. And it was this anchor of the first state capitol that had much to do with the development of our historic district. This was operated by the state. And then eventually the Visitor Center moved up to Main Street, and there's a replica building on the right. Many of you remember this. This is the corner of Main and First Capitol Drive. It was St. Charles' first gas station. The Preservation Society tried to save this gas station. We thought it had a uniqueness about it because it was the first gas station. We ran into a muck because many said it didn't fit within what we were doing within the historic district. We wanted it for our first visitor center. This was before the depot was restored, and the little barber shop that sat next to it. But powers to be prevailed, and St. Charles' first gas station was torn down, along with the phone booth went as well. There's the gas station, the little barber shop, the Hyde Paint building, and a billiards hall that is now on the right there. That is the First State Capitol gift shop and trading post rather. And the Hyde Paint building is Lewis and Clark's restaurant, and what it looks like today. And that's in 2 carousels, the evolution of the South Main Historic District.